Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 41 of Chess Basics, things every chess player ought to know. In this video, I'm beginning a new series on the opening known as the Queen's Gambit. So in the next 4 videos, I'll explore different flavors of the Queen's Gambit. Today, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the Queen's Gambit accepted, which is an interesting line. But first, let's give a little overview of the opening and what your choices are on move 3. So the Queen's Gambit is the moves d4, d5, and then c4. So you can't play the Queen's Gambit unless your opponent is willing to go along and play this move d5. It really requires this setup. If he plays any other second move besides, or first move actually, besides d5, then it's not a Queen's Gambit, it's some other opening, a Nimzo Indian or King's Indian or some Indian opening if he moves the knight out, and there are many other responses. But what we're talking about is the Queen's Gambit in these series, so that's d4, d5, c4. Now, so Black is asked a question at this point, which is, what does he want to do about this pawn on d5 that he put there, trying to occupy the center and counter White's push to d4. Now, there are 3 main moves here. The Slav Defense just defends that pawn, so if you take, you can take back and you have a very equal position. That's one way to play it. A second way to play it is e6. That's known as the Queen's Gambit declined. Sort of a classical way of playing it. Again, you're defending the pawn. You have blocked in the bishop, but there are many ways to deal with that. It just takes some time. And the third main move here is taking, and that's known as the Queen's Gambit accepted. Black accepts the gambit. And then if we back up, there are many other less common alternatives. You can bring the knights out. Knight f6 is the yeah, knight c6 is the Chigorin. Knight f6 is the Marshall defense. And there's even gambit lines like e5. So I'll talk about those in later videos. I just wanted to bring up that little overview. And then for the rest of this video, we're going to be talking about Queen's Gambit accepted. So it's over, right? And the question is, what do you want to do about this? You've given up a pawn, and a lot of times Queen's Gambit accepted is called not a true gambit because in most of the lines you get that pawn back, so it's not a big deal to have given up a pawn. So let's, I just want to show a simple trap line in the Queen's Gambit accepted to show what can go wrong if Black tries to hold on to that pawn too much. So the line starts with the move e3. And it's kind of mysterious what this does, but it does open a line from the bishop onto the c-pawn, so Black has to defend it. I mean, what's mysterious about e3 is why are you blocking in your own bishop? That's the question. Why not just push on to e4? But e3 is a move here, and it sets up a trap. And the trap goes like this. If Black defends the pawn, then you attack it with the move a4. And if he defends with the a-pawn, this doesn't work because of a simple skewer here. This rook in the corner is undefended. So that's the first point. And so if he wants to continue to try and hold on to his pawns, then he plays the move c6. Now you take, and he takes, and now he's just fallen into your trap. He really can't afford to take because of this move, queen f3. Wins material. He can save the rook in the corner by playing something like knight c6. Queen takes and bishop d7, and then the queen retreats somewhere. But you pick up a whole piece. And it's funny, the rook, not only is it unprotected, but it has no moves. It's blocked in by its own pieces. So that's shows the danger of trying to hold on to the pawn. But this is not the most common move. It has the merit of setting this trap, but Black has a decent reply here in the move e5. So let's take a look at this. If you grab the e-pawn, black can exchange queens, and he's got a pretty equal position. So typically you'll grab here, and then black can take your d pawn. And so you got your pawn back, but it's black's turn to move. He'll just do a developing move there, or maybe knight f6, some developing move. And it's kind of an equalish position. What you have is a little more space in the center due to your pawn on d4, but it's an isolated pawn. The development is about equal, and so it's a game from here. And that's sometimes white players are looking for a little more. This is black has nearly equalized in this position. So the most accurate move here, let's go back all the way to the beginning. So this started d4, d5, c4, queen's gambit, and then d takes c4, queen's gambit accepted. Now the most common move here is not e3, that's just the trap line. Because of that move, e4, which is a bit of a pain. So the most common move here is actually knight f3, which stops that, guards the square. And now the most common move for black, so I'm showing the main line of the queen's gambit accepted here, is just to develop. His pawn is not under threat. You made a move, you made a developing move, but you haven't really attacked the pawn. And now play e3, attacking the pawn. And the most common move for black here is not to defend the pawn at all, but just to develop. So let's show what the main line might look like. He just plays here, you take the pawn, and then black strikes out with c5, trying to undermine the center. So this is the main line of the queen's gambit accepted, and it's playable for both sides. You'll see black players going for this, and it's interesting. It's an unbalanced position because you don't really want to take that pawn and have the queens come off. That's kind of equal. So you're going to maintain some tension in the position. There's, I guess the most common move here is castling for white. And then, let's see, black can take the pawn here, and then you would get into this isolated queen's pawn position. But this one is a little better for white now because you've got more development. You've got two pieces out versus one, and you've already castled. So basically, well, black is going to get one more developing move here. It's black's turn. To compare it to the previous position we looked at, black is basically, white is basically one move ahead. He's gained a tempo compared to the previous line. So, so this is a decent position for white. What black usually plays instead, it's a funny move, a6, but the idea is that he's going to continue with b4, harass this bishop, gain a tempo, and once again, if white takes the pawn, there'll be an exchange of queens, sort of equalish. There's a lot of different moves that white has here. He can just move his queen to the side, allow the pawn to come forward, and move the bishop out of the way. He can move the bishop out of the way ahead of time. He can move to either b3 or d3, or he can play the move a4. And that's all I want to say about the main line. It's playable for both sides and leads to interesting and somewhat unbalanced positions because of the majority of pawns that black gets on the queen side there in most of these lines. Okay, so let's back up again. Well, let's go all the way back to the beginning. So the queen's gambit is d4, d5, c4. Queen's gambit accepted is d takes. Okay, so I've talked about a couple moves here. I've talked about knight f3 followed by e3. There's the e3 line immediately, which sets up the trap. If you want to play that and see if you find any unwary players that will fall into it. There's a third option here, which is to play the move e4. And this is a gambit. And the reason it's a gambit is because black can play e5. So this is interesting. This e5 move keeps coming up. So black is a pawn ahead, so he can basically just give up a pawn if he wants to. Now if you take it, once again black can trade queens and get kind of a equal position. So instead of taking it, the normal move here is to develop knight f3. And so at this point it's a gambit. You're just giving up on ever winning that pawn back. Black takes, you take, and this is your starting point of your gambit position. You've got 2 pieces developed. You can castle quickly. Black has no pieces developed, but he has a pawn, and you know, he's going to continue to try and harass you with moves like bishop b4. And you want to block this check with your knight. You don't want to trade your good dark squared bishop. And then he's going to develop, and you're going to castle and try and get an attack going. Just play on a pawn down. You do have some ideas of attacking this f7 square with some knight move. So it's a playable gambit and interesting. So that's another way you can play. So let's go back to the beginning. So Queen's Gambit accepted. So it's d4, d5, c4. And takes. So there's 2 playable options here, I would say, and e3 is playable too. You just if Black knows what he's doing, you get a slightly worse isolated queen's pawn position, but still with some edge for White. So the 3 moves were knight f3 leading to the main line, e4 the gambit line, and e3 the trap line, as I call it here. But there's one more thing I wanted to talk about, which is what happens when you play knight f3. Your opponent goes knight f6, and you go d3. And then he doesn't play the main line, but he tries to hold on to the pawn from this point, because you still haven't regained the pawn. This is the first time. You've delayed attacking it, and now you're attacking it. And he has a bunch of different ways he can try and defend it at this point. And you won't find these lines in any opening book, because they're not particularly good. But you do see them in practice, particularly at my level in Blitz. I see this all the time, where Black players will try to hold on to the pawn. And until I figured out how to play against it, it was a bit tricky, because sometimes they just hold on to the pawn and win the game. So I wanted to give an example game that I played recently where it went like this, where Black did exactly this. He tries to hold on to the pawn. And just to give you some ideas of how you undermine and get your pawn back, or get Black into a disadvantageous position. So knight f3, going for the main line. In this case, he played b5 immediately. He didn't play knight to f6 here. And I play e3. So just completing the setup of the main line of the Queen's Gambit decline. Now there's a little bit of pressure on this pawn, but of course you can't take it yet. Nothing's really going on. And Black continues to support his pawn by playing c6. So he's neglected his development and made a lot of pawn moves, but what can you do about it? Well, a key move, as we saw in some of these other lines, is a4. You just want to undermine. And now he could even play a6 here, because after you take, he can take with the c pawn. But he doesn't need to do that. And in fact, he has the idea of just really reinforcing that pawn and holding on to it with every means possible. So he develops a piece with the sole idea of protecting this pawn chain. So I took the pawn. He takes back. And now, let's see. There's a pretty good move here. Let's see. Did I miss it? Maybe it was right here. Yeah, right here. Even before I take, there's actually an even better move right here that I missed during the game. So let's go ahead and explore this, because this is something you should always keep in mind. The way I played is okay too, but this is better. It's to develop the knight to e5. And what this does is it allows the queen to come out to f3 and start to make threats along this diagonal. And the knight on e5, you'll notice, is hitting pieces that are on that diagonal. So here, let's erase these lines. So what can Black do in this position? So he's done his best to hold up his pawns, but now you're threatening to start taking stuff here, and things might fall apart. Now, the engine actually recommends pushing on with b4, which is just giving up the pawn, because you would take on c4 then. Suppose you still want to hold on to the pawn, and you try something like, just developing it, say. Now, takes, and queen f3. You have this trick. Okay, so that's not working. Let's back up. So suppose you want to give yourself a little more flexibility here. How can you avoid? Oh, you could go this way, I guess. Now this still won't work, right? Takes, and if you take, you lose the rook. If you take this way, well, you gave yourself an opening square. Queen f3. You could try moving your knight here, but now there's a very neat trap here. I don't know if you saw that coming, but the queen and all my pieces were focused on the queen side. But you do have to worry about your king safety too. So this is quite a dangerous position. You can play around with this position if you like on your own. And just set this up on the board. See if you can find some defenses for black. Like I said, the engine recommends just pushing on with b4 and giving up the pawn or taking. All of which leave black with a horribly messed up pawn structure, and white is doing extremely well. He's going to get back one of his pawns, castle, and just have a great position because of his development here. So let's go back to the game. I didn't notice this knight e5 idea, and what I did was I took back, and then I played the move b3. There's a very common follow-up, is you want to keep undermining these pawns. And also why this is kind of an instructive opening, that you get these moves, these pawn moves that are aggressive, and then you have to play undermining moves to defuse the intentions of your opponent. If you just let these pawns advance and set up a strong position here, black can do pretty well. So you really need to undermine them right away. You can't just ignore them. So after b3, my opponent took, and now every time he exchanges like that, this helps me because I get my pieces out. Now he brought his queen out to defend the pawn, and now after knight a3, there's actually no more. Well, the engine recommends knight a3. I played knight c3. After knight c3, there's no more way to defend the pawn, and I end up getting it back here with interest. I played bishop takes. Apparently knight takes was more accurate. But anyway, not only have I got my pawn back, but I have better development, and he has an isolated rook pawn over here that I can play against for the rest of the game. So a decent position for white, and very typical of the kind of things that go wrong when black tries to hold on to the pawn. So these are the things you need to remember. You need to when after accepting the pawn, the main move is knight f3. You can also try the gambit line with e4 or the trick line with e3. And if black tries to hold on to the pawn, you have to remember to undermine it. And you have ideas like a4, b3, knight e5, and queen f3 are all your main tactical ideas to accomplish this undermining and to get your pawn back or get a strong attack going. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I think next video I'm going to continue, and I will look at the Slav Defense. If you have any comments, leave them in the section below, and I will see you then. Bye.